according to some of the people that live in the area, the suspect was known to be a duck hunter. A lot of the guns that he had that were registered to him were in fact duck hunting guns. This is duck hunting terrain, and the reporting is that he possibly had a duck boat. This was an option for him if he's looking to dispose of a body.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Manhattan architect Rex Heuermann is scheduled to appear for the second time in a pretrial hearing today. Meanwhile, each day that goes by, more people are coming forward and more pieces of the puzzle are coming together.
Just to sort of orient where we are, we're in essentially a bay that has a lot of little islands. As I said, the dumping ground is here behind me, but this way, directly across the bay, is actually where the accused lived.
Now you may remember that orientation thing in the number 4 clue we all missed. In this analysis, I want to focus on two big pieces of the puzzle and see whether we can make any more sense of them than we already have. One is the boat duck hunting theory, and then also the how do we learn to covet theory. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're someone who's been holding out for the Titan coverage, I'll be doing another episode on that. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So number 1, the boat theory. So let's test your observation skills. Without looking at a map or a schematic, on which side of the road were the victim's remains found? Do you know the answer? Now your attention to detail. Were some victims found on one side of the road, some on the other, or all on the same side of the road? I'm talking about the 4 victims associated with Heuermann. Now, one simple and easy way to disprove the boat theory is if you can show that any of the remains of any of the victims associated with Heuermann were found on the south side of Ocean Highway. In other words, the side facing away from the bay, facing the Atlantic. In this scenario, a boat disposal wouldn't make much sense because it would involve the perpetrator carrying the victim across the highway and then returning to the boat. Unlikely. As it turns out, all 4 of the victims' remains were found on the north side, on the bay side, on the side of the suspect's home, or on the Long Island side. The boat theory puzzle piece fits in several dimensions. First, it matches the basic map of the victims and the suspect's home. Second, it matches in terms of the side of the road, the bay side versus the ocean side. And third, it does make sense that duck hunting, which was done in the area, we've just heard that's now been confirmed. That might be done as a cover instead of driving to such a remote area and having one's vehicle, make, color, etc. identified. And that then brings us to the second puzzle piece. The how do we learn to covet theory.
And how do we begin to covet, Clarice?
Serial killers learn to covet, and where there is a sexual aspect, and there is one here, the question is, where do they learn to covet? What did Heuermann see every day between July 2007 and December 2010? As it happens, we don't need him to tell us. Someone who called him boss worked for him between September 2007 and 2010, slap bang within our target timeline. And so if you go to this article in the Intelligencer, I think it's written by someone using a false name, Mary Shell. She writes, quote, "When I first met Rex Heuermann in his Midtown office, his face turned red like that of a shy teenage boy who had been surprised by a hot girl in the cafeteria. Now, I must say that is a chilling description, because I think in a real sense that's exactly what he was. And under that marshmallow man was the shy teenage boy from school. Going back to the article, even sitting behind his desk, he looked to me like a giant. His office was mostly staffed by women like myself, young and petite, the girl next door type. We knew he was married with a family in Massapequa, but he never spoke of them. Just a few months earlier, authorities say he murdered his first known victim, 25-year-old Maureen Brainerd Barnes, end quote. So there is a potential answer, that he learned to covet, develop feelings and frustrations while at work, while working in the dizzying fairy tale that is Manhattan. Incredibly, even the staff who wrote the article about her monster boss seemed to intuit Heuermann's lust for power. She writes, whether or not he had any real political clout, he believed he did, and tried to convince others that he did too. In other words, what's coming through there is someone who's seeking, hungry for, challenging for, trying to attain power. And there's kind of a little bit of doubt whether he has any. And this is where it gets really interesting. Heuermann seemed to be attracted to some of his employees, which were obviously a lot younger than him, and it wasn't reciprocated. And so when he tried to combine business with pleasure, how did he do that? Well, he did it by taking them hunting or inviting them to go hunting with him. And when he did that, they balked, they refused. That's also in this article. She writes, quote, he famously loved guns, and we all knew that he was a collector. He would frequently invite colleagues to go hunting or shooting at the range, including one of my attractive co-workers, that he seemed to mention the idea to every time they spoke. So it's not something that came up here and there. It was very much part of the psychological fabric. This idea of combining hunting with this idea of seducing or flirting with his co-workers. She writes that she never accepted the offer, confiding in me that it sounded dangerous and creepy. My former colleagues described how he gushed about his bear hunting trips in particular, baiting an area and lying in wait, end quote. So that's another dimension. He doesn't only hunt ducks, he's also hunting bears. And he does it by baiting an area, luring the bear into the area and then killing it. So can you see there's something curiously sneaky about leaving the bodies where they were left in this case, implying essentially that someone had driven there. Because theoretically, he could have dumped them anywhere in the water if he was disposing of bodies in a boat. But then if he did that, that would lead investigators to a boat. By taking the boat to a section of road, that would imply that someone got there by road. In this sense, we don't have a hunter, well, don't we have a hunter luring the cops into a particular misleading idea? And that brings us to the third dimension. Heuermann's former employee combines out of her own, like from her own experience, she chooses to combine the hunting metaphor with a killer, or with the suspected killer, several times in her article. She talks about a target in sight. She talks about bodies that were wrapped in hunting blinds, right? And then also that when one of his employees quit and started her own company, he was enraged, and then he was seen outside the building gazing up into the second floor windows in the early evening. It's kind of an analogy to someone who is, in the same way that you might go out in the evening to hunt animals. Well, you could also do that outside a building to hunt a person. Now, one has a sense of a parallel universe where in the swamps near GILGO Beach, Heuermann was the master of his universe, whereas in the universe of Manhattan, the pretty birds all got away, and he was getting himself caught in frustrating knots. And so Massapequa was a familiar domain, somewhere he knew, somewhere he could gain the upper hand. And so didn't the thought ever occur to him to turn fantasy into reality? Not by chasing or courting or wooing, because he tried that and it failed. But by luring, by tricking, as he did with the ducks, and then having his way, except doing this with a person. In other words, wasn't the serial killing a kind of human form of duck hunting, complete with camouflage, luring, execution, dressing, and disposal? Does that make sense? I'm not going to take it further than that. I am thinking about doing a more in-depth analysis of the Laurie Vallow thing and some of the things that I learned covering this case, including kind of an astonishing legal aspect, a legal area of the case that may have taken our knowledge of the law forward. Remember, I did go to Boise, Idaho to cover that. I'll also be following up with the analysis in this episode, taking this whole idea even further about coveting at the office. Let's take that thinking even further and see where it goes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.